In 1942, a surveyor named Safi Asfiya finished a count that had taken him years. 40,000 underground rivers. Not caves. Not springs. Tunnels, dug by hand, beneath one of the driest countries on Earth. Together, they delivered 600,000 liters a second, an Olympic pool every 4 seconds, with no pumps, no electricity, no fuel of any kind. Some had been running for 2,500 years. Then Iran stopped using them, for what looked at the time like an excellent reason. It drilled 1 million wells instead, and the ground began to sink. But the tunnels were never outperformed. Many still flow today. And engineers have been forced to admit there are 2 things inside them they cannot copy. One is a piece of physics. The other is a set of skills. So how did 2 men with a rope and a lamp beat 1 million modern wells? And why did we tear it out anyway? This is the story of the machine that could not break the thing it was drinking from. If you're learning something new, subscribe to the channel. We're just getting started. What is actually down there? The word is qanat. In Persian, kariz. Start with the problem, because it had no solution anywhere else in the ancient world. On the Iranian plateau, rain falls on the mountains in winter and vanishes into the gravel at their feet. Rivers that run in March are dust by June. The water is real and abundant and completely out of reach, sitting hundreds of meters down and tens of kilometres from anyone who needs it. You could dig a well, but lifting water costs an ox, a rope, and a man for every hour of daylight, and it yields a trickle. You could build an aqueduct, the way Rome did. But there is no high source to carry from, and an open channel in that heat loses much of its flow to the sky before it arrives. So somebody asked a different question. What if you don't lift the water at all? What if you go down to meet it and let it walk out on its own? A qanat begins with one vertical shaft driven into the saturated gravel, the mother well. The deepest ever recorded, at Gonabad, goes down 300 meters, close to the height of the Eiffel Tower, dug downward with hand tools. Then, from a point far away and much lower, near where people actually live, the diggers start a tunnel and drive it back uphill toward the base of that well. That is the whole trick. Dig from the wet end and you drown. Dig from the dry end and every metre you cut drains itself behind you. Every 20 or 30 metres they sink a shaft for air and for hauling out rubble. From above, a finished qanat looks like a line of craters marching across empty desert. And when the tunnel reaches wet ground, water seeps in and walks downhill on its own, forever. Or that was the idea. Because to understand what happened to Iran, you first have to understand the men who dug these things. The men who were paid to die. They were called qanats, a hereditary guild, most of them from the desert city of Yazd, and they were paid extremely well because the work killed people. 2 men worked a shaft about 3 feet across, one with a mattock, one with a short-handled spade. Above them, a windlass, a leather bucket, and a 3rd man hauling up the spoil. They worked by oil lamp, and the lamp was not only for light. If the flame guttered and shrank, the air was going bad, and they climbed out. That flame was the only gas detector they had. In loose ground, they lined the walls as they cut, setting oval hoops of baked clay behind them like the ribs of an animal. And the most dangerous moment was the last one. When the tunnel finally broke through into saturated ground, the water did not trickle. It came. Men drowned at the moment of success, washed down the channel they had spent a decade cutting. Prayers were said every time a Mukani went down the shaft. That was not decoration. That was the job. Even a short qanat took more than 10 years. The one at Gonabad runs 33 kilometres. The longest, at Zarch, has 2,115 shafts sunk along its route and passes directly beneath the city. 10 years, 33 kilometres, 400 shafts, by hand. Quick question, and leave me a comment. Had you ever heard of a qanat before today? And is there anywhere near you where the water table has dropped inside your own lifetime? The gradient paradox. Now here's the question that has genuinely bothered engineers. That tunnel has to fall at a gradient of roughly 1 in 1,000. 1 metre for every kilometre you walk. Less than a single degree. About 10 centimetres of fall across the length of a football pitch, and the window is narrow in both directions. Too steep, and the water accelerates, scours the floor, and brings the roof down. Too flat, and it stops moving, silts up, and dies. Miss it, and 10 years of work and several men's lives are gone. They hit it, in the dark, underground. across tens of kilometres, with a plumb line, a lamp, and a length of rope. A paper in the Journal of Archaeological Science describes this outright as a paradox. Modern crews solve the same problem with laser guidance and satellite positioning, and they still occasionally miss. And let's be precise about the claim, because it matters. It is not the accuracy we cannot match. We can beat that now, comfortably. It is the instruments. So hold on to that question. We come back to it right at the end, and the answer is not the one you would expect. What we do have is the manual. Around 1,000 years ago, a Persian mathematician named Al-Kharajhi wrote a book called The Extraction of Hidden Waters. It is the oldest surviving textbook of groundwater science anywhere in the world, and it is not philosophy. It is 23 sections of hard practice, which rocks indicate water, which surface plants tell you what lies underneath, how to test whether water is drinkable, the recipe for the lime cement that joins tunnel segments, the design of a surveyor's level he invented himself, the ring of ground around a qanat where nobody else may dig, and how to formally hand the finished project to the people who will inherit it. 1,000 years ago, someone wrote a maintenance schedule for infrastructure he expected to outlive him by centuries. He was right to. But the reason these tunnels lasted was not craftsmanship, and it was not the manual. It was something stranger, and it was buried in the physics. It wasn't stupid. Which raises the obvious objection. If they were that good, why did anyone ever stop? Because in 1949, the Shah of Iran visited the United States and was taken to see the Hoover Dam. He came home fascinated by the scale of it. American engineers followed under a Cold War aid program, bringing deep well rigs and powerful pumps. The future of water was machinery. The qanat was a museum piece. Then a sweeping land reform in 1963 handed more than 2 million peasant families their own ground and state credit to farm it. And with the pump came a promise that must have sounded like freedom. No more waiting 10 years and burying men in the dark. No more inheriting a share of a village tunnel measured out in minutes by a water clock. Drill a hole in your own field in a week and take whatever your motor could lift. And at first, it worked. Cultivated area expanded. Rural incomes rose. Families who had been tenants on someone else's water were suddenly independent of it. It wasn't stupid. It delivered, immediately and visibly, to people who had waited generations for exactly that. The bill arrived later, and it arrived somewhere nobody was looking. The bathtub with a hole in the wall. Here's what nobody understood at the time. A well is a straw. You put it in the ground and you suck. How much you get depends on how hard you pull. Hand crank, a little. Diesel pump, a lot. Bigger pump, more. Nothing in the design of a well tells you to stop. The only limit is the machine. A qanat is not a straw. A qanat is a drain. Picture a bathtub with a hole cut into the sidewall, partway up. Water above the hole runs out. Water below it does not and cannot, because the drain sits at a fixed height. It has no ability to reach down and take anything beneath its own lip. That is exactly what a qanat does to an aquifer. The tunnel is cut at one elevation and collects only the water standing above that line. In a wet year, the table rises and it runs strong. In a dry year, the table drops, the flow weakens, and if the drought is bad enough, it simply stops. It cannot pull harder. It has no capacity to pull at all. So a qanat physically cannot draw an aquifer down. It takes the surplus and leaves the reserve, not because anyone regulated it, but because there is no mechanism by which it could do otherwise. And because the aquifer never empties, the ground above it never compacts. 3,000 years of taking water out. Nothing drained. Nothing sank. Not through restraint, through geometry. That is the first thing we have never copied. We drilled deeper than any Mukani ever dreamed, and faster, and far cheaper. What we have never built is an extraction system that stops on its own. The tunnel could not overdraw. Not because it was better engineered, because it was worse. It had no ability to cheat. It had a limit. The experiment nobody designed. Drill a deep well near a qanat, and you do not have to drain the aquifer to kill the tunnel. You only have to pull the water table below the tunnel floor. The moment you do, the drain is sitting above the water line. The qanat does not weaken. It goes dry, permanently. Then it spirals. Every qanat that died pushed its families onto pumps of their own, which pulled the table down further, which killed the next qanat down the valley. You can watch it in the paperwork. Asfiya counted 40,000 in 1942. 19 years later, 30,000, of which only 20,000 still ran. Iran has lost roughly 35,000 in 50 years. And somewhere in there, the country ran a controlled experiment that nobody designed. Zarch is the longest qanat in the world. 50 years ago, it discharged more than 150 litres per second. Then deep wells went inside its protection zone. Today it runs at about 60 litres per second in the upper reaches and 28 at the outlet. Now going to bad. Same country, same desert, same drought. No deep well has ever been sunk inside its protection zone. Its discharge holds steady at roughly 140 litres per second. Same technology, same climate, same drought. One had wells drilled beside it, one did not, and now the ground is going down. More than 31,000 square kilometers of Iran is sinking faster than 10 millimeters a year, an area the size of Belgium. Near Rafsanjan, 34 centimeters, a third of a metra, every year. Because when you empty an aquifer, the pore space between the grains closes under the weight above, and it does not open again. You did not borrow the water. You crushed the container. The manual survived. The hands did not. So the obvious conclusion is that Iran should rebuild them. And that deserves more honesty than it usually gets. A qanat is not a drop-in replacement. It runs all year, whether anyone needs the water or not. It cannot be throttled up to meet the summer peak of a city of 10 million. It needs a slope. And its greatest virtue is also its ceiling. A system that can never take more than the surplus, can never deliver more than the surplus. They are being repaired anyway. Around 8,000 have been brought back, and 11 were placed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2016. But a qanat you rescue still flows, while the ground that has already sunk does not come back up. You can save the tunnel. You cannot uncrush the aquifer beneath it, and the bottleneck is not money. To repair one, you still have to send experienced diggers physically inside. Bad air, collapsing roof, earthquake. The tunnels outlived the guild that knew how to keep them, and that is the second thing we cannot copy. It is also, finally, the answer to the gradient. It was never the physics. The physics is simple. What is gone is the knowledge of how to read a hillside for water, cut a gradient by eye across 30 kilometers of darkness, and come back out alive. Not the arithmetic, the hands. That lived in families. It was almost never written down, and the families are gone. For 3,000 years, a civilization pulled water out of a desert with a technology that had no throttle, and it lasted precisely because it had no throttle. Then it invented one. And in 60 years, the throttle drank the ground out from under its own cities. 40,000 underground rivers, cut by hand, that modern engineers can measure, admire, and not reproduce. The qanat was never the clever part. The limit was. Did any of this surprise you? Leave me a comment and tell me which part landed hardest. The tunnel that has run 2,500 years without a pump. The one cut to a fifth of its flow by wells drilled beside it. Or the ground that is going down now and will not come back up. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. That's what we do here. The engineering the world forgot, and the parts of it we're still getting wrong. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one.